At T plus 60 seconds, the ship is still safe. The ocean is black glass, the horizon is quiet, and inside the combat center the air smells like warm electronics and coffee that's gone cold. At T plus 30, the screen starts to crowd. Little returns blink into existence like sparks in a storm, and the calm voice of the system turns into clipped, urgent prompts: track, classify, confirm. The ship isn't watching anymore, it's choosing targets. At T plus 10, the choices get uglier. Because now it's not choosing what to shoot, it's choosing what to let through, and which compartment might flood, and which sailor might not make it back up the ladder. That's what saturation does. Too many, too fast, too close. People imagine warships like floating fortresses, steel, missiles, radars, and confidence. They picture a clean duel. One threat appears, one defense responds, problem solved. But real defense isn't a duel. It's a conveyor belt. Sensors feed the brain feeds the weapons feed the clock, and the clock never stops. Layered defense is just a way of buying time in chunks. Tonight, you'll hear how those layers really work, from the far horizon to the last 20 meters. And you'll hear where it breaks when the swarm hits, because the swarm isn't trying to be stronger than the ship. It's trying to be more than the ship can process. Picture a castle built on water. The outer wall is detection. The next wall is tracking. Then missiles. Then decoys. Then guns. Then a final desperate ring of steel and fire. Layered defense feels comforting because it sounds like backup plans. If one layer fails, the next catches it. If the next fails, the next catches it. But saturation is not a normal attack. Saturation is a flood. A flood doesn't defeat your walls in a fair fight. It pushes water into every crack at once until the whole structure is fighting pressure from all directions. That's why layered defense can become a trap when the swarm arrives. The first layer is the farthest and the quietest, sensing the world before the world reaches you. Radar sweeps the sky like a lighthouse beam you can't see, painting invisible arcs across salt air. But the sea is messy. Waves throw back noise. Weather smears shapes. Low-flying objects hide in the clutter, like dark birds skimming the surface. Small drones can appear as nothing, then something, then suddenly too many somethings. And if the ship detects late, everything downstream becomes frantic. Every second you lose out there turns into 5 seconds of panic in here, where the alarms are louder and the options are fewer. Detection is not the same as certainty. A blip is just a question mark. The system must decide: bird, boat, decoy, drone, missile, or something you've never seen before. Now imagine 50 question marks arriving at once. The screen fills with symbols, each one demanding a label, each label demanding a decision, each decision demanding responsibility. This is where the swarm starts winning by turning the ship's brain into a bureaucrat drowning in paperwork while the building is on fire. The first failure is mental. Not enough clarity, soon enough, to act early with confidence. Inside the Combat Information Center, the air is cool and dry, and every voice is trained to stay calm. But calm doesn't mean slow. Calm means controlled speed. A warship is a decision factory. Tracks become threats. Threats become engagements. Engagements become minutes of survival. Swarms attack the factory itself. They don't need to break the walls if they can jam the conveyor belt. When too many inputs arrive, the system starts triaging, and triage is the beginning of choosing who dies. Layered defense has a hidden rule. Each layer assumes the layer before it did its job. The missile layer assumes you tracked correctly. The gun layer assumes missiles thinned the herd. The last-ditch layer assumes only a few leakers remain. Saturation breaks that rule by making every layer fight at full capacity at the same time. It's like every fire door in a building slamming shut while people are still running through the hallways. That's why swarms feel unfair. They force the ship to defend in reverse, starting close in, while still trying to solve the far-out picture. And reverse defense is where mistakes multiply. Now, the second layer. The invisible fistfight of electronic warfare. Jammers, decoys, spoofers, tools, meant to confuse the enemy's eyes. In calm conditions, soft kill is elegant. You don't have to fire. You don't have to reveal your position with smoke and flame. You nudge the threat off course, like a magician redirecting attention. But swarms are built to be confused. Some drones can be disposable scouts. Some can be decoys. Some can be the real payload. When everything is cheap, deception becomes affordable at scale, and the ship's elegant tricks become blunt instruments. There's a sound sailors remember. The sudden change in tone when the ship shifts from monitoring to engagement. Voices sharpen. Keyboards clack faster. The hum of ventilation feels louder because everyone has stopped breathing normally. This is the moment layered defense stops being a concept and becomes a schedule. You don't just need to shoot. You need to shoot in the right order, at the right range, with the right ammo, in the right sequence. Saturation attacks the schedule. It makes every decision late. And a late decision on a warship is like a late break on ice. You can still turn the wheel, but the physics have already decided where you're going. People love the image of missiles launching. Bright flame, clean arcs, certainty. But missiles are inventory. They are limited, precious, and slow to replace. A drone swarm turns missile defense into a terrible trade. One interceptor for one cheap drone is already painful. One interceptor for one decoy is worse. 20 interceptors for 20 small targets is a nightmare because the ship's magazine is not a bottomless well. And the swarm knows it. It whispers the same message with every extra blip. You can't afford to shoot me. When too many becomes the truth on your screen, even perfect missiles start to feel like a losing strategy. This is where the first collapse happens. Not a physical breach, an emotional one. The crew begins to think in rationing. Save shots, hold fire, wait for confirmation. But waiting is what the swarm wants. Because every meter the drones travel is a meter removed from your options. Long-range solutions become mid-range. Mid-range becomes close in. Close in becomes last ditch. Layered defense is a staircase. The ship wants to fight at the top. Saturation pushes you down the steps faster than you can climb back up. And every step down is louder, hotter, closer. Now, imagine the swarm arriving from multiple directions at once. Not a line, an arc. The sea surface becomes a stage, and the drones are actors entering from every door. A ship can turn, but turning takes time. A ship can reposition, but repositioning is slow. A ship can prioritize, but prioritizing is painful because it means leaving some bearings weaker than others. Saturation forces ugly geometry. The best defended side becomes the side you pointed your sensors and weapons toward. And the worst defended side becomes the side that's busy being ignored. The swarm doesn't have to be brilliant. It just has to be everywhere. Layered defense also relies on something people forget: communication. Data links between sensors, between ships, between aircraft, between command and control. In a clean battle, the network is a superpower. It's like having extra eyes in the sky and extra hands on the trigger. It turns the fleet into one organism. But in chaos, networks can become noise. Too many tracks shared too quickly can overwhelm humans and machines alike. And if the swarm includes jamming or interference, the network becomes unreliable, the worst kind of failure, because you don't know if you're blind or just misinformed. So let's define the enemy in one word: throughput. How many threats can the ship detect, track, classify, and engage before the timeline collapses? Swarms are throughput attacks. They turn the ship into a checkout lane at a supermarket during a blackout. People piling up, carts overflowing, tempers rising, and the cashier's hands moving as fast as they physically can. The ship's systems might be accurate, lethal, world-class, but accuracy doesn't matter if you can't process fast enough. Lethality doesn't matter if you can't decide in time. Saturation is the brute force that makes excellence look slow. Now, the mid-layer, where defense becomes a knife fight. The threats are closer. The time is shorter, and the sound of alarms feels like it's inside your ribs. This is where ships shift to shorter-range interceptors and rapid reaction weapons. The engagements happen fast, sometimes faster than a human can fully understand, with the system suggesting shots and humans approving under pressure. And this is where a swarm can do something terrifying. It can force the ship to spend its attention. One drone might not be lethal, but 10 drones in the wrong pattern can drag your defense posture out of alignment, like tugging a blanket off a bed until everything slides. A swarm isn't just a lot of drones. It's behavior. It can probe. It can feint. It can split. It can suddenly compress into a tight cluster that looks like one object, then explode outward again. To the ship's brain, that behavior is poison. It makes tracking unstable. It makes classification uncertain. It makes predictive engagement harder because the future path of each drone is less predictable than a missile's. And the closer they get, the more the sea itself becomes part of the swarm's disguise. Spray, haze, and the shimmer of heat can turn clean lines into smears. The ship is fighting not just machines, but the environment that hides them. Now the decoy layer. Chaff, flares, inflatable illusions, corner reflectors, false targets, the theatrical tricks of modern naval survival. Decoys are meant to create doubt in the enemy's guidance. They are meant to make a missile fall in love with the wrong thing. But swarms don't lock on the same way. A drone can be piloted, semi-autonomous, or simply programmed to crash into what it sees. If it's cheap enough, it can accept being fooled and still keep coming because the real goal is not precision. The goal is to make you spend time and ammo until you crack. And here comes the next collapse point. The moment the ship realizes the layers are bleeding simultaneously. Missiles are firing. Decoys are deploying. Jammers are humming. Guns are spinning up. In movies, this looks heroic. Everyone doing their job. Lights flashing. Tension. In reality, it's terrifying because it means the outer layers didn't stop the problem. It means the threat has already compressed the fight into the ship's personal space. You can feel it in the soundscape. The calm beeps become constant tones. The ship's metal seems to vibrate differently. The ocean outside is still cold and dark. But inside, everything is heat. Heat from screens, from adrenaline, from machinery pushed to its limits. Now we reach the close-in weapon systems, the last ring people romanticize as a superhero. Rapid-fire guns, tracking mounts, automated kill zones. They are brutally effective against a few leakers. That's what they were built for, the final cleanup. One threat slips through, the gun finishes it. But a swarm turns cleanup into a tidal wave. The gun can only point one direction at a time. It can only engage one target at a time. Even if the rate of fire is insane, the queue of targets can still be longer than the seconds you have left. That's the nightmare math. Bullets are fast, but too many is faster. And this is where the story becomes human, because behind the automation is a crew. They hear the gun bark like a chainsaw. They feel the ship shudder. They smell cordite and hot metal. They also feel the silence between bursts, those tiny pauses where everyone waits for the next contact to appear. The next warning tone, the next decision. Saturation doesn't just stress machines. It stresses people. It narrows vision, shortens sentences, and turns every calm checklist into a rushed prayer. The ship's defense is a system, but the system is operated by humans with heartbeats. When defense becomes close in, the ocean changes character. The horizon stops being an abstract line. It becomes a ring around you. A boundary you can't escape. The threat is no longer a dot on a radar. It's an object you can imagine. Something small, fast, low, buzzing like an angry insect. Except the insect carries explosives and intent. This is where layered defense becomes a feeling rather than a plan. The layers are no longer steps. They're doors slamming shut. And if the wrong door shuts too late, the swarm is already in the hallway. Here's the brutal truth. Most defensive systems were built for rare high-value threats. Missiles, aircraft, a handful of inbound objects that justify expensive responses. Swarms flip the value equation. They create many low-cost threats that force high-cost reactions. They turn your best weapons into expensive habits. And that's not just economics. It's strategy. Because even if you survive the first wave, you may have burned the tools you needed for the second. Saturation doesn't need to sink you today. It just needs to leave you exposed tomorrow. So why do layered defenses fail? Not because layers are useless. They fail because layers assume scarcity. They assume the enemy can't throw infinite objects at you. A swarm is the opposite of scarcity. It is abundance used as a weapon. It is too many made physical. Once you understand that, you start seeing the real weak points. The number of tracks, the number of interceptors, the reload time, the operator workload, the rules of engagement, the angles of approach, the limits of sensors. Near the sea, the swarm isn't a bullet. It's a stress test. Now, let's walk through the breakpoints, like a countdown you can feel. First, the radar picture becomes crowded. Then, classification becomes uncertain. Then, missiles begin to ration. Then, soft kill gets noisy. Then, guns begin to queue. Each step sounds small until you imagine it in real time. A minute is long in a movie. In combat, a minute is a lifetime that disappears instantly. And the swarm compresses the timeline. It forces layers to overlap until the ship is fighting on every ring at once, like trying to solve 5 puzzles with one pair of hands while the room fills with smoke. There's another quiet failure: identification. On the open ocean, you don't always get permission to shoot early. You need certainty. You need rules. You need confirmation. Swarms weaponize that hesitation. A drone can look civilian until it isn't. It can be launched from somewhere you can't legally strike. It can hide in traffic, near boats, near coastlines, near ambiguity. So the ship waits, and waiting steals distance. And when distance is stolen, the layers become thinner. That's how layered defense collapses under saturation, not only through physics, but through policy, doubt, and timing. Now imagine the sound of a drone swarm at night. Not one buzzing, but many, like a hive. Like a storm of insects you can't see but can hear. The ship's deck lights glow faintly. The sea throws back fragments of sound. The crew listens as much as they watch, because when objects get close, human senses start searching for any clue the screens might miss. And the worst part is the invisibility of scale. You might hear 10 drones and think it's 10, but it could be 50. It could be 100. Sound doesn't give you a count. It gives you dread. And dread is what saturation feels like before the first impact. Let's talk about the layer that rarely gets credit: maneuver. Ships can move. They can turn into threats, change angles, alter radar cross-sections, force different engagement geometry. But maneuver is slow compared to air threats. A drone does not care about your turning circle. A swarm doesn't care about your best angle. It will simply adjust, split, or reapproach from another bearing. So maneuver becomes a partial shield at best. It can buy seconds, maybe create a cleaner engagement arc, but saturation eats seconds like fuel. And when the swarm is close, there is no outmaneuver. There is only endure. Now we hit the ugliest layer: damage control. Because the goal of defense is not perfection. The goal is survival. If a drone gets through, the fight doesn't instantly end. The ship becomes a living organism trying to keep itself alive. Closing doors, sealing compartments, fighting fire, pumping water, rerouting power. And swarms can exploit that too. 1 hit can force the crew to divert attention. 2 hits can split teams. 3 can overwhelm internal response while external defense is still ongoing. This is the hidden truth. Layered defense is not just weapons outside. It's also resilience inside. Saturation tries to overwhelm both at once. So what does the break actually look like? It often looks like lag, a delay, a hesitation, a system that is still working, but working behind the moment. The screen updates, but the picture is always a second old. Tracks jitter, classifications flip, engagement recommendations arrive late. The crew feels like they're trying to catch falling knives. That's the signature of saturation. Not one dramatic failure, but a gradual slide where everything is slightly too slow. And slightly too slow is the difference between intercepting at a mile and intercepting at 50 meters. Now let's build a simple mental model you'll never forget. Picture 3 buckets. See, decide, shoot. If you can't see clearly, you can't decide confidently. If you can't decide fast, you can't shoot in time. If you can't shoot enough, you can't thin the swarm before it becomes too close for comfort. Layered defense is just distributing those buckets across distance. The outer layers are mostly see. The mid layers are decide plus shoot. The inner layers are shoot now. Saturation attacks all 3 simultaneously, turning the buckets into overflowing sinks. This is where the swarm becomes a psychological weapon, because it forces you to watch your own limits in real time. You can see the queue building. You can hear the urgency in voices. You can feel the ship vibrating as systems spin up. Every operator knows the same fear. Not that the system can't kill one target, but that the system can't kill them all. And kill them all is what layered defense quietly promises. Saturation exposes that promise as a myth. It turns defense into a negotiation with reality. How much can you stop before something slips? And that is exactly what your hook means when it says the system starts choosing who dies. So what do navies do about it? They try to push the fight outward again. They add drones of their own. They add better sensors. They add automation. They add cheaper interceptors. They add directed energy experiments. Because the only sustainable answer to cheap mass is cheap mass. If the enemy's strategy is quantity, your defense cannot be only quality. It must have volume. That's the future pressure point. The ship that wins won't just be the ship with the smartest missile. It will be the ship that can engage many targets cheaply, quickly, and repeatedly without emptying its magazine on the first wave. But there's a trap here. More automation can mean faster decisions, but faster wrong decisions are still wrong. In a crowded sky, the cost of misidentifying is enormous. Imagine being in a dark room with a flashlight. You can swing it faster, but speed doesn't guarantee clarity. Sometimes it just creates more shadows. So navies chase a balance. Enough automation to handle the workload, enough human judgment to prevent catastrophe. Saturation squeezes that balance like a vice. It forces humans to trust machines, and forces machines to operate in conditions they were never perfectly trained for. Now, let's return to the moment the swarm is close. The guns are firing. The deck crew can feel the concussion through steel. The night flashes in brief pulses, like distant lightning, except it's coming from your own ship. Some drones are hit and fall, skipping across the sea like stones. Others keep coming, because the swarm doesn't rely on one hero. It relies on attrition. And in that chaos, the defense layers stop feeling like separate systems. They become one continuous struggle. Sensors, jammers, missiles, guns, crews, everything is one organism straining against a flood. This is layered defense at its limit. Not elegant, not clean, but raw survival. Here's the part that makes swarms so dangerous. They compress your margin. In normal defense, you have buffer. Time to double-check, time to deconflict, time to reassign targets. Under saturation, buffer disappears. Decisions must be made while information is incomplete. That's why the system chooses targets at T+30. It's not being dramatic, it's doing triage. And triage is a confession. It's the ship admitting it cannot give equal attention to every threat. It must prioritize. And in war, priority always means something else gets less. That is the moral weight of saturation. The invisible thing people don't see when they talk about layers. Then, this is Avidius T of Grands. So, where exactly does it break? It breaks when the engagement queue becomes longer than the seconds available. It breaks when the ship's magazine becomes more precious than the targets. It breaks when classification uncertainty forces late shots. It breaks when multiple bearings create too many simultaneous fights. It also breaks when the crew's cognitive bandwidth runs out. Humans can be heroic, but they cannot be infinite. That's why warship defenses fail when the swarm hits isn't a statement about weakness. It's a statement about limits. Every layer has a limit. Swarms are built to find every limit at once. Now, imagine the aftermath. The alarms soften. The guns slow. The ocean is still there, cold and indifferent. The ship's interior smells sharper now. Heated metal, smoke residue, sweat. The crew does what professionals do. They reset. They count inventory. They assess damage. They seal wounds. But they also carry a quiet knowledge. They know layered defense didn't fail like a broken machine. It failed like a dam under record water. It held until it couldn't. And the difference matters, because it tells you what comes next. Not one magic fix, but redesigning the dam for a new climate of threats. That redesign is already happening. More cheap interceptors, more point defense, more off-board sensors, more autonomous pickets, more counter-drone drones. But every new layer adds complexity, and complexity can create new failure modes. A ship can become so sophisticated that it becomes fragile, like a smartphone with 1,000 features that crashes when you need it most. So the real winner will likely be the ship that stays simple where it can and ruthless where it must. Clear priorities, fast kill chains, enough cheap volume to meet cheap volume. Because saturation will not go away. It's too tempting. It's too affordable. Let's make the lesson visceral with one more countdown. The first minute is comfort. The next 30 seconds is uncertainty. The next 10 seconds is triage. And the last seconds are consequence. A drone that slips through at the wrong angle isn't just a hit. It can be fire in a corridor. It can be shrapnel in a control room. It can be a loss of power at the worst moment. That's why swarms terrify navies. Not because drones are unstoppable, but because drones are stoppable only up to a point. And saturation exists to push you beyond that point, where layered defense becomes layered regret. If you're listening to this and thinking, so ships are doomed, that's not the right conclusion. Ships adapt. Navies adapt. The ocean has always been a place where offense and defense evolve in cycles. The right conclusion is sharper. Defense must change its economics and its tempo. It must stop treating every inbound object like a premium threat, requiring a premium response. Because the swarm is an accounting trick, it turns cheap objects into expensive decisions. The ship that survives the next era is the ship that can make cheap decisions quickly without drowning in its own process. That's the future of layered defense. Not just layers, but layers that scale. Is less than #0. 5# is greater than. And this is why this episode is binge glue. Because once you understand layered defense as a throughput problem, you start seeing the next question. If defense breaks under saturation, what does the winning counterswarm look like? What changes when ships deploy their own drones as shields? What happens when the ocean becomes an ecosystem of autonomous hunters and decoys? That's the cliffhanger hiding inside this story. Layered defense isn't dead. It's evolving into something weirder, more distributed, more autonomous, more crowded, and more ruthless about prioritizing. The next era won't be one ship versus one missile. It'll be systems versus systems. Layered defense is real. It's powerful. It's the reason ships survive missile eras that should have ended them. But it is not a promise of invincibility. It is a plan built on assumptions. And the swarm exists to shatter assumptions. It asks one brutal question. How many threats can you handle before your layers overlap into chaos? The answer is different for every ship. But the pattern is always the same. When the swarm hits, the clock gets loud. If you remember only one image from this episode, make it this. A warship is a machine that turns time into survival. It spends time to detect. It spends time to decide. It spends time to shoot. Saturation is the enemy stealing time. It's the enemy throwing so many objects at you that your time budget collapses. And once time collapses, the layers stop being a staircase up to safety. They become a staircase down to the last ring, where steel meets speed, where guns try to solve a problem that should have been solved miles away. That's the moment your defenses fail. Not by weakness, by overload. So the next time someone says, "A drone can't beat a warship," you'll know what's wrong with that sentence. One drone can't. A swarm can. Not because each drone is mighty, but because the swarm is a design for saturation. It's a design for forcing choices. It's a design for turning certainty into doubt and doubt into delay. And delay is the real killer at sea. Delay is how you go from calm to triage in 30 seconds. Delay is how the system goes from choosing targets to choosing sacrifices. That is why layered defense collapses under saturation. At T plus 60 seconds, the ship is still safe. The ocean is quiet, and everything feels controlled. At T plus 30, the screen fills, and the control becomes effort. At T plus 10, the effort becomes consequence. And the ship learns the lesson every Navy is learning right now. Layered defense works until it meets too many, and the swarm is built to be too many.